Seguimos en CARICAM 2015 desde Miami y vamos a iniciar un debate con Julian de Digicel sobre la regulación en el Caribe y quizá podamos encontrar también algunos puntos interesantes sobre cómo él ve el tema regulatorio en el Caribe y cómo incluso su visión de la regulación en el Caribe podría aplicar a regulación en otras partes del mundo, dada la visión que él tiene sobre el asunto. Así que vamos a cambiar al inglés para hablar con él. Julian, welcome to telesemana.com.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you here. So you had a presentation yesterday on regulatory issues in the Caribbean, and actually before we started recording, we're having a quite nice conversation on regulation and the impact you feel is having on the operator's capacity to innovate. So give us your vision on that aspect.
Yes, we spoke on two subjects: the future of spectrum, and the World Radio Conference, which is going on right now, and of course spectrum being really key in terms of operators providing innovative services. But in the latter part of the presentation, we spoke about net neutrality and focused that more on the Caribbean. How would it affect the Caribbean if we know that some regulators are going to introduce net neutrality in our small islands? And I think one of the things that really worries us, the broadband providers, is with these rules, with more regulation, is this going to hinder our development in terms of our rollout? I've often heard the phrase light touch regulation. I attend many of the regulatory conferences in the region, and this is a word that's used quite often by regulators, light touch regulation. But to be honest, what I see is more regulation being introduced. Some of our islands have 11,000 population, 17,000, yet I see us adopting regulations similar to the US or Europe. And I think honestly we should step back and see whether we really need to introduce these regulations. We spoke about net neutrality, and one of the things I suggested was we really should just take a sit back and pause and think about this. Do we really need to introduce net neutrality rules that's been adopted in the States? We think it's net neutrality is really a US solution to a US problem. I think we need to be careful in terms of the rules that we adopt. The Caribbean, you know what's really important for the Caribbean? Is that we actually connect the unconnected.
Okay.
When it comes to fixed broadband networks, we have a low penetration rate in the Caribbean, generally speaking, much lower than the US and the UK and Europe. And I feel we should think about that first. Let's roll out our fiber to the homes. Let's get 100 megs connection to all of our subscribers. Let's allow the operators to be innovative rather than adopting rules such as net neutrality, which are very simplistic. What I call the blanket approach, where you treat all traffic exactly the same. And we would argue, certainly in other industries, the water industry, the electricity industry, you charge differently for commercial users as you would the ordinary household user.
Right.
And I think that's an important principle, but we shouldn't lose track, shouldn't you lose sight of the fact that it's more important that we get broadband to all of our Caribbean citizens. That should be the key goal. And anything that hinders that, like regulation, like net neutrality, I think that could hinder the progress.
Let me give you a specific example of something that could happen in a Caribbean island. And you tell me if, because it's related to net neutrality, and you tell me if that's something you would agree with rather than with net neutrality. So for example, let's assume that Google and Facebook decide to invest with one of the local operators in fiber to the home in one of the Caribbean islands. It's not a huge investment. I mean, Google is doing fiber investments in the US. Probably they could just light up a complete island very quickly. But let's assume that because they are doing that investment in that fiber to the home within that Caribbean island with the local operator, they want to have some preference traffic control on Google and Facebook, so users actually have a better experience when accessing Google and Facebook versus other sites that could be such as things like best effort. Would you think that that's something good? Obviously that would violate the US net neutrality laws, but obviously that would give fiber to the home in the Caribbean. Would you think that in that scenario it's better to have Google and Facebook have that investment and preference traffic allocation within those pipes than having net neutrality? Is that something that...
I would love Google, Facebook, WhatsApp to invest in the Caribbean. The problem at the moment, the way that the net neutrality laws are set in the US, favour the content providers, the Googles, and there's no investment. The only investment being done in the Caribbean is by the broadband providers, the Digicels, the cable and wirelesses, the Telems, the Telesurs of the Caribbean. We're the ones that are providing the capacity, we're providing the pipes, but they're not investing. And that's the whole essence of this, that we're not seeing any investment.
But they might not have an incentive to... I'm saying that perhaps if you would give them the right to have,
We would certainly like to talk to them. I mean, okay. I'd love to invite them to our Caribbean conferences. We have the Canto conference coming up in Puerto Rico next year on the 31st of July. And we will try to reach out to the Googles and to see whether they would come along and let's have a conversation. But right now it's definitely unbalanced. And you've got to remember, we are small islands. We're at a very sensitive stage where we've got all this convergence. We are getting permission now to roll out fibre to the home. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to fixed broadband, we are way behind. And at the moment, it's purely the investment is coming from the operators. So,
to my point.
I would answer it in that way.
Okay. Let's go for the spectrum, because spectrum is also, we could actually translate the discussion on net neutrality also to a spectrum. Also, should the Caribbean follow the allocation of a spectrum that we're seeing in other places, or should the Caribbean adopt its own roadmap to allocate the spectrum for 4G and 5G in the future, as 2020 is just around the corner and 5G supposedly is going to arrive on that year?
Again, I think this is where we need to be careful, our regulators, when we look at spectrum for the Caribbean. We're focused very heavily, as you know, the World Radio Conference is going on right now in Geneva, and one of the hot topics is the sub-700 band, the UHF band.
Correct.
The fact is, and we had this debate this morning, that we in the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, we're hardly utilising the UHF band. So that is ideal for mobile services, and it should be equally shared with broadcasting because we're not using it anyway. So I think we need to look at each particular bandwidth to our own situation, not necessarily follow other operators, but look at other countries, but look at things on their merits. But I will say, when I attended the CTEL meeting as Canto chairman, I was really pleased to see that the Caribbean islands that were present, now we've got over 20 Caribbean islands that should be members of CTEL, but only about 4 attended. But I was happy to see the 4 of us get together as a group and vote for mobile services in the UHF band, which has allowed that discussion to continue to the World Radio Conference. Okay. So I would put the plea out there. We need our regulators, our government officials to come to the Inter-Americas, the CTEL meetings, to go to the World Radio Conference. It's crucial that we are there. Even though we are small, we can make a difference, as we've shown with the UHF band. Okay. And I think it's critical that we're there. And that is a big issue. We haven't been there for many years, and we need to change that. I've got to put it out to operators. We need to encourage our regulators, government officials, to come to these very important meetings.
Now, given the fact that you are talking about a band that would be very Caribbean specific, how would you think the devices offering would come up for the Caribbean to have cheap devices for a band that is very specific for a market that is not as big as other big markets? And usually we've seen in the Caribbean that there's a difficulty to get the devices because of the volumes, and you have to look for other manufacturers than the traditional ones to try to get enough devices to have a nice offering.
Yes, I mean that's a very good point. I mean sometimes in some markets, and I work for Digicel regional groups, so I get to visit the markets. Sometimes you see customers with really, you know, the latest and greatest smartphone, but does the network actually support it? We in Digicel, we actually have rolled out LTE a couple of years now in some of our islands. Antigua, where I'm from, has had LTE for I think more than 2 years. And there we've been able to supply handsets, but you've also got the network, so you can utilize the smartphones better. But that is a challenge, getting these smartphones into the Caribbean because of the volume. I mean that's an issue. That is an issue.
All right. Well, Junior, I think we can leave it here. Thank you so much for visiting us, and good luck with your next meetings for to get all the Caribbean operators aligned for the same objectives.
I see it as a real challenge, but I'm up for the challenge. I think I'm so passionate about the Caribbean that when we actually come together and make a collective decision, that's what we want, and we need to see more of that. So I think I may have a job for a little while just to keep that momentum going.
Excellent.
But thank you very
so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.